The year was 1871, and the edge of Wyoming territory stank of tobacco, horse piss, and cheap whiskey. Evening light slanted through the warped windows of Harlan's trading post, catching dust in the air like it was trying to show the place for what it really was, a pit for broken men and cheaper deals. Laughter rolled across the room, thick with malice and smoke. She stood near the wall, barefoot, thin as a rail, her wrists bound in coarse rope. Her dress had once been blue, though dirt and tears had claimed the color long ago. A bruise shadowed her cheekbone. Another bloomed along her jaw. She said nothing, didn't move, just stared at the cracked floorboards like they might open up and swallow her whole. They sold me for a bottle of whiskey, she would tell someone later, and not even the good kind. Her stepfather leaned on the bar, the skin of his neck red from drink and sun, his voice slurred as he made his bargain. She ain't much use anyhow. You'll get a hard worker. Quiet, too. He tapped the empty air, meaning her. Throw in that bottle, and we'll call it fair. The saloon keeper, thick-armed, greasy beard glinting with sweat, barked a laugh. Ain't worth a full bottle, Amos. Half, maybe. She's used, ain't she? The man's grin cracked into a leer, and the room broke into laughter that had nothing to do with humor. Amos spat on the floor, anger and shame tangled in the same gesture. Full bottle, or she rots in your back room. I don't care which. The saloon keeper shrugged, turned his shelf, and pulled down a dusty bottle of rye. He slammed it on the counter, the cork already split, and slid across the wood. There's your price. Amos took it with trembling hands, pulled the cork out with his teeth, and drank deep, half the bottle gone in one swallow. He wiped his mouth with the back of his sleeve, coughed, and looked at the girl. You're lucky, Liza, he slurred. Someone finally wants you. Liza, that was her name. No one in the room bothered to say it except him, and even then, it sounded like something foul in his mouth. She didn't cry. Tears had stopped coming weeks ago, maybe months. She didn't plead or beg or curse him the way her mother once had before the fever took her. She only looked at him once, a flat, cold stare that sent something sharp through him, though he hid it behind another drink. The men at the tables watched with the hungry eyes of those who'd forgotten decency long ago. Cards slapped, coins clinked, but every so often one would glance over, measuring her like she was a mule at auction. When Amos stumbled out the door, bottle in hand, the laughter followed him into the street. He never looked back. The saloon keeper turned toward her, wiping the counter with a filthy rag. You can start in the kitchen, he said. Then maybe earn your keep upstairs later. She didn't move. Did you hear me, girl? The room had gone quiet again, a kind of waiting silence, the kind that sat heavy before violence. Her eyes met his, defiant for the first time. Then the door opened, and everything changed. The door creaked wide, and a man stepped through, tall, broad-shouldered, dust clinging to a dark coat that had seen too many miles. A low winter wind followed him in, carrying grit that stung the eyes. He paused just inside, scanning the room with the slow measure of someone who'd been in places like this before and lived to regret it. His face was shadowed beneath the brim of a hat, but the eyes that met Liza's were clear, steel gray sharp, unflinching. No one spoke. Even the piano player stopped, a single note hanging in the smoky air before dying. The stranger walked the bar, the spurs on his boots whispering across the floor. Whiskey, he said, voice low and even. The saloon keeper nodded, set down a glass, and reached for another bottle. The same one Amos had bartered with still lay on the counter, half empty. The stranger's hand went to it before the barkeep's could. He lifted it, studied the label, then looked at Liza, the rope around her wrists, the mark on her face. This her price, he asked. A few of the men chuckled nervously. Ain't your business, mister, the saloon keeper said. The stranger didn't blink. I'm making it mine. He pulled the cork free, tilted the bottle slightly, and then, with deliberate calm, poured the contents onto the floor. The liquor hit the wood with a hiss, soaking into the cracks like it was feeding the ghost beneath. The room held its breath. That, the stranger said, setting the empty bottle upright again, wasn't worth her soul. The saloon keeper's face flushed dark. You just wasted my whiskey. No, the man said quietly, his hand lowering toward a revolver on his hip. I just bought her freedom. The tension snapped like a rope pulled too tight. 3 men rose from their tables, chairs scraping hard against the floor. One of them, a thick-necked ranch hand with missing teeth, sneered. "You got a death wish, stranger?" The man's eyes didn't leave the barkeep. "You have to be alive to grant it." The first gun came up fast, but not fast enough. The stranger's Colt cleared leather in a blur, the sound of the hammer cocking slicing through the silence. One shot. The ranch hand fell, his chair clattering behind him. Smoke curled from the barrel, the smell of burnt powder rolling through the room. No one moved after that. The stranger turned toward Liza, holstered the gun with the same quiet precision, and reached for his knife. The blade caught the lamplight as he cut through the rope at her wrists. The fibers gave way, falling to the floor like shed skin. "You're free," he said. His voice wasn't gentle, but there was something in it, a conviction that struck deeper than comfort. Liza stared at her hands, at the red welts the rope had left behind. "Free," she echoed, like it was a word from another language. "Walk," he told her. She hesitated, glancing at the barkeep, at the men still frozen in their seats. Fear clenched her chest. Every instinct said to stay still, to vanish into the background. But the stranger was already walking toward the door, and for reasons she couldn't name, she followed. When the door swung shut behind them, the sound of it felt final. The air outside was cold, carrying the scent of pine and dust. The sun was sinking low, red light fading into the hills. Horses shifted near the hitching post, stamping at the ground. The stranger untied his bay gelding, checked the saddle straps, then looked back at her. "You can ride." Liza shook her head. "No." He sighed through his nose, then swung up into the saddle with an ease that spoke of long years in saddle. "Then walk beside me until you can." She stood still, arms hugging herself against the wind. "Why'd you do it?" she asked finally. He didn't answer, just nudged the horse forward, and she started walking, boots scuffing against hard dirt. The trading post behind them shrank with every step, until it was just a smear of shadow against the dying light. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf called, a long, low sound that made her skin prickle. "You don't even know my name," she said. "I don't need to." They went on in silence for a while, the only sound a steady creak of leather and the crunch of gravel underfoot. She glanced up at him, at the hardened line of his jaw, the faint scar that ran from his cheek to his ear. There was something guarded in him, like every word cost more than he could afford. "You killed a man for me," she said softly. He looked straight ahead. "I killed a man who needed killing." It should have frightened her, that calm certainty. Instead, she felt something else, a strange, fragile sense of safety, the kind that made her chest ache with its unfamiliarity. They reached the ridge where the land dropped away into a valley of dry grass and scattered sagebrush. The horizon burned orange and purple, the last light slipping behind the hills. He stopped there, scanning the distance. "You got anywhere to go?" She thought of her mother's grave, unmarked, back near the river, of the shack she'd been dragged from, of the stepfather's laughter. "No." He nodded once, as if that answer made sense to him. Then keep walking. They traveled until night fell, a pale moon rising over plains. Liza's legs ached, her hands raw from cold, but she didn't complain. She'd been silent too long to start now. When they finally stopped by a stream, he dismounted and built a small fire from dry grass and dead wood. The flames threw their faces into relief. Hers lined with exhaustion, his carved by quiet resolve. "Eat," he said, handing her a strip of jerky from his saddlebag. She took it, chewing slowly, her eyes never leaving him. "You got a name?" He poked at the fire with a stick. "Maybe." "You gonna tell me?" "Not tonight." The answer didn't surprise her. He was a man who carried silence like a weapon, and she sensed asking too much might break whatever fragile peace sat between them. When the fire burned low, she lay down near it, the warmth sinking into her bones. The stranger sat awake, staring into the dark as if watching for something only he could see. She wanted to thank him, to say something that might fit the shape of what he'd done, but no words came. Instead, She closed her eyes and let the rhythm of the fire lull her towards sleep. The last thing she heard was the slow scrape of his knife against flint, the steady breathing of a man who had seen too much to ever rest easy. And for the first time in months, she slept without chains. When dawn came, she woke to the sound of a horse snorting and the faint smell of coffee. The stranger was already saddled, staring east toward the rising sun. "Morning," she said, her voice hoarse. He glanced down at her, nodded. "We ride soon." She pushed herself up, rubbing her eyes. "Where to?" He adjusted his hat, the light catching on the revolver at his hip. "Away from hell," he said simply. She looked back once, toward the direction of the trading post, a speck of smoke still curling in the distance. Something loosened in her chest. The air was colder here, but it tasted clean. He turned his horse and started down the trail, slow and steady. She followed, her bare feet stirring dust that caught in the morning light. The road ahead was long, uncertain, and dangerous, but it was hers now. As the fire pit faded behind them, Liza whispered into the wind, "The bottle was empty, but for the first time my soul wasn't." The morning broke cold and clean. Frost clung to the tall grass, glimmering under a pale sun that had yet to warm the earth. The stranger, Elias, though she didn't know his name yet, rode ahead in silence, his horse's hooves dull against the hard-packed trail. Liza followed on foot, the hem of her torn dress brushing the dust. Her bare feet were wrapped in strips of cloth he'd torn from an old saddle blanket. They didn't fit right, but they kept the stones from cutting too deep. They'd left Harlan's trading post behind them hours ago, though its ghost still clung to her. Every sound, the jingle of Elias's spurs, the creak of leather, the distant cry of a hawk, felt sharper now, like her senses had been starved too long. The stranger hadn't spoken since dawn. He rode with his hat low, gaze fixed on the horizon, the rifle slung easy across his back. He had the look of a man who'd spent more years riding alone than sleeping under a roof. His silence wasn't cruel, just practiced. Liza tried to match his pace, though her legs ached. After a while, she said softly, "You could have left me there." He didn't look back. "Could have. But you didn't." "No." The wind picked up, carrying the smell of sage and dust. She stared at his back, wanted to ask more, but unsure what questions were safe. "You got a name?" she tried. He didn't answer right away. Then, after a long stretch of silence, he said, "Elias, Elias." She repeated, tasting the sound. "You a lawman?" "Used to be." He didn't offer more, and she didn't push. There was something in his voice, a shadow of memory best left alone. They rode through the afternoon. The land rolled wide and empty. Mountains blew on the far edge of sight. Every now and then, Elias's gaze flicked behind them. Liza caught the movement, the tension in his shoulders. "Someone following?" she asked. "Likely." Her stomach tightened. "Those men from the post?" He nodded once. Ain't the kind to let pride go easy. Liza swallowed, fear prickling her spine. "You think they'll find us?" He shifted in the saddle, hand resting lightly on his revolver. "They'll try." The road stretched ahead, endless and cruel. Liza drew her arms tight across her chest, the sky above them vast enough to make her feel small all over again. Yet somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear and exhaustion, something new stirred. Hope, raw and unfamiliar. She didn't trust it yet, but it was there. That night, they made camp beside a shallow creek. Elias built a small fire, the smoke rising straight into the cold sky. Liza sat close to the flames, warming her hands. She wanted to thank him again, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she said, "You really think they'll come after us?" He tossed a twig into the fire. "Men like that don't forgive, but they don't think long, either. We'll be gone before their tempers cool." Liza nodded, though the unease in her chest didn't fade. The fire crackled between them, soft and steady. Elias leaned back against the saddle, his eyes half-lidded but alert. "You ever killed before?" he asked suddenly. She froze. "No." "Then hope you don't have to." His tone wasn't warning, just truth. He turned his face toward the stars, the light glinting off the scar at his jaw. She wanted to ask how many times he had, But she already knew the answer. The prairie wind shifted, bringing the sound of distant hoofbeats. Elias's hand went to his gun. Liza stiffened. "Riders," he murmured. "How far?" He listened. Close enough. The hoofbeats grew louder, echoing to the narrow cut of the land. The fire hissed as Elias kicked dirt over it, the glow vanishing in a puff of ash. "Stay low," he said. Liza dropped behind a fallen log, heart hammering in her chest. Elias moved like a man who'd done this 1,000 times. Swift, deliberate. He checked his rifle, sighted the ridge. The riders came into view. 5 of them, shadows against the moonlight, rifles glinting. She recognized 2 from the post, the ones who'd laughed when her stepfather handed her over. Her breath caught in her throat. They slowed their horses, scanning the dark. "They went this way," one shouted. Elias waited, patient as stone. Then, when the lead rider came close enough, he fired. The crack split the night. The man toppled from his saddle before the echo died. Chaos followed. The others shouted, returning fire blindly into the brush. Bullets tore through branches, sparks flaring where they struck rock. Liza pressed her face into the dirt, trembling. Elias fired again, 1 shot, then another. Precise. Ruthless. 2 more riders fell. The rest turned tail, their horses kicking up clouds of dust as they fled into the hills. Silence crept back, broken only by the crackle of cooling gunmetal. Liza lifted her head. Elias was already reloading, face unreadable. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, though her voice shook. "You killed them. Would have been us otherwise." He stood, scanning the ridge. "They'll come again. Maybe more next time." Liza looked down at the dead men sprawled near the creek. For a moment, she saw her own reflection in the dark pool beside them, eyes wide, face smudged with ash and fear. She whispered, "I was supposed to die there, wasn't I?" Elias glanced at her, something soft flickering in his gaze. "You're still here. That's what matters." They moved before sunrise, heading deeper into the wild country. The land grew harsher, rocky ridges and thorn brush, water scarce. Elias gave her the horse and walked beside it, his limp subtle but constant. She protested, but he shook his head. "You'll keep better pace that way." By midday, the trail narrowed into a canyon cut through by an old river long gone dry. Heat shimmered off the stone. Liza guided the horse carefully, the reins slick with sweat. Then she heard it, a faint click behind them, a rifle being cocked. Elias! He turned fast, but not fast enough. A gunshot cracked, echoing through the canyon walls. His body jerked, the impact spinning him sideways. He hit the ground hard, clutching his shoulder. Liza screamed. Another shot rang out, splintering the rocks near her head. She dove for cover, heart pounding. Bandits! The ones who'd run last night had brought friends. Elias dragged himself behind a boulder, blood darkening his sleeve. He motioned for her to stay down. "Take the rifle," he rasped. Her hands shook. I can't." "You can, or we both die." She crawled to his side, grabbed the rifle, the wood warm from his grip. The world narrowed. The smell of blood, the ringing in her ears, the sight of shadows moving against the canyon wall. She aimed. A man appeared, shouting as he raised his gun. She pulled the trigger. The recoil slammed her shoulder, the sound deafening. The man fell. She froze, staring. Elias's voice cut through the haze. "Reload. Don't stop." She did, again and again, until the last echo faded. Then there was only the wind, whispering through the stones. When she finally lowered the rifle, her hands were slick with sweat. Elias leaned back against the rock, breathing heavy, his wound bleeding through the fabric. Liza crawled to him, pressing a trembling hand against his shoulder. "You're hurt bad." "I've had worse," he muttered, "but it'll need tending." Tears blurred her vision. "You saved me. Let me save you." He tried to speak, but the effort drained him. She tore strips from her dress, soaked them in the canteen, and cleaned the wound. The blood kept coming, but she worked steady, jaw tight. When it was done, she tied the bandage and met his eyes. You're not dying here. Not after all that. His lips twitched in a faint, wry smile. Didn't plan to. They found a cabin at dusk, half buried in weeds at the base of a rocky hill. The roof sagged, and the door hung crooked, but it was shelter. Liza helped Elias inside, his weight heavy against her shoulder. Dust rose as they stepped in, the air thick with the smell of old timber and forgotten years. A single cot leaned against the wall, moth-eaten, but still standing. She guided him onto it. "Rest," she said. He grunted. "Trying to sit up? Can't. They'll track us." "They won't. Not tonight." She looked him dead in the eye. "You're staying still, Elias Gray." He blinked. "You know my name." "You told me," she said softly. "Back by the creek. You were half conscious." He exhaled slowly, defeated. "Guess I did." Liza found an old lantern and coaxed a weak flame to life. The light flickered over the walls, catching the glint of a rusted horseshoe nailed above the door. She rummaged through what was left of the cupboard, just dust and a cracked jar of beans. But it was something. Elias watched her, one hand pressed to his bandaged shoulder. "You done this before?" "Patching wounds." "Once," she said, "when I got bit by a stray dog." She didn't make it. "I'm sorry." She shrugged. "Don't be. She used to say the Lord don't take the good ones first. He leaves them to fight a little longer." The room fell quiet again, broken only by the sound of wind against the shutters. Liza sat beside the cot, elbows on her knees. "Why'd you save me, Elias?" He stared into the lamplight, eyes distant. "Because I couldn't save the last one." She frowned. "The last one?" He nodded slowly. "My wife. She was taken. Sold off by outlaws near the border. I tracked them for months. Found the camp too late." The words came hard, like stones being forced out. "I'd buried her myself. Swore I'd never draw a gun for anyone again. Then I saw you standing there in that post, and I broke that promise." Liza didn't speak for a long time. When she did, her voice was quiet but steady. "Then maybe that promise wasn't meant to keep." He looked at her then, really looked, past the bruises, past the dirt, to the steel forming behind her eyes. "You're stronger than you think." She gave a half-smile. "So they tell me, usually right before they try to break me." Outside, a coyote howled. The firelight flickered across the cracked walls, and for a moment, the world felt smaller, safer. Elias shifted, wincing. "We'll head north when I can ride again. There's a town up that way, quiet, honest. You could start over." "And you?" He didn't answer right away. "I'll move on. That's what I do." She wanted to argue, to tell him she didn't want to be left behind, but something in his expression stopped her. The man carried ghosts heavier than bullets. When the wind died down, she leaned her head against the wall, exhaustion pulling at her. "Get some sleep," he said softly. "You too." "I'll try." She smiled faintly, eyes closing. "You don't sleep much, do you?" "No," he admitted. "Too many nights like this." Liza drifted into uneasy rest, the faint sound of his breathing steady beside her. The storm of fear inside her had quieted, not gone but changed. For the first time, she didn't feel like prey. Elias sat awake long after she'd fallen asleep, watching the fire burn low. His thoughts drifted to the graves he'd left behind, to the faces he couldn't forget. But when his gaze fell on the girl sleeping near the hearth, something in him shifted, a small, unfamiliar spark of peace. Outside, dawn crept over the horizon, washing the hills in pale light. The world was still dangerous, still cruel, but inside that battered cabin, for one fleeting morning, there was something close to grace. The fire had burned low, leaving only a red eye in the ashes. Outside, dawn pushed its pale fingers through the cracks in the cabin walls, washing the shadows away. Lila stirred under the ruffled blanket, the smell of pine smoke clinging to her hair. For the first time in days, her dreams had been silent. Elias sat near the door, his rifle laid across his knees, hat tilted forward. He hadn't slept much. The wilderness outside was still, but he felt it, the wrong kind of quiet, the kind that comes before horses and men. "Coffee." Lila's voice was soft, cautious. He looked up, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "Ain't much left, but it'll do." She poured from the tin pot, the liquid thin and bitter. Their hands brushed as he took it, and neither spoke for a while. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It carried the weight of something unspoken, fragile as glass. Then, far off, came the sound Elias had been waiting for, the faint clatter of hooves against stone. He stood slowly, set the cup down, and looked through a gap in the wall. 3 riders, maybe 4, moving steady along the ridge. "They found us," he said. Lila's breath caught. She glanced toward the back window. "Can we run?" Elias shook his head. "They'll see us before we clear the slope. Only ways down through the ravine, if you can keep up." "I'll keep up," she said, already pulling on her boots, her face pale but steady. He handed her a small pistol, one of his spares, worn but serviceable. "Ever shoot before?" She nodded once. "At rabbits. Never men." He gave her a look. "Ain't much difference when they're hunting you." They slipped out the back of the cabin into the thin morning mist. The pine trees loomed tall and dark, their needles whispering as if warning them away. Elias moved first, guiding her along the narrow trail that dipped into the ravine below. Behind them, the sound of voices grew clearer. Coarse laughter, the jingle of spurs, the bark of an order. Lila stumbled once on the loose rock, but Elias caught her arm and pulled her close behind a fallen log. Dust rose as horses crested the ridge above them. "Keep low," he murmured. They crawled through brush until the trees opened into a dry creek bed littered with old mine debris. Rusted shovels, half-buried rail tracks, splintered wood. A ghost of the gold rush days, left behind like bones of something long dead. Lila whispered, "Where are we going?" Elias pointed toward a cluster of collapsed shacks up ahead. "Old mining outpost. If we can reach it, we'll have cover enough to make a stand." Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. "You mean to fight them?" He didn't answer right away. "If it comes to it, yeah." They reached the outpost just as the first shot split the air. Bark exploded from a nearby tree. Lila ducked with a cry, clutching the pistol. "Go!" Elias shouted, firing back once before diving behind a wagon wheel. Bullets bit into the ground around them. She scrambled for the shacks, her breath tearing through her chest. The world had narrowed to dust, smoke, and the deafening crack of gunfire. Elias moved like a man carved from instinct. Quick, deliberate, his rifle barking twice, each shot finding its mark. One rider went down, tumbling into the ravine below. "2 left," he called. Lila pressed her back against the wall, her trembling fingers tight around the pistol. She peeked through a broken window, saw one man circling wide on horseback, another on foot, closing fast. Fear surged in her chest, but beneath it was something sharper, defiance. She aimed and fired. The shot went wild, but it startled the man enough for Elias to finish him with a clean, echoing crack. The final rider turned, spurring his horse hard toward the ridge. Elias took a breath, aimed, and fired once more. The echo rolled through the canyon and was gone. Silence. Lila lowered the pistol, her hands shaking. "Are they—" "Gone," he said. He exhaled slowly, lowering his rifle. "For now." She looked at him. Dust streaked across his face, sweat glinting on his brow. Something inside her shifted, not just gratitude, but the slow, fierce bloom of hope. He turned toward the horizon, the rising sun cutting gold through the mist. "We ain't safe yet," he said. "They'll send more when those ones don't come back." Lila swallowed hard. "Then where do we go?" "There's a rail line 30 miles west. You can catch a train in Dry Creek. It'll take you out of this territory." Her voice broke a little. "And you?" Elias looked away. "Ain't many places for men like me to go, but I'll see you there." They set out again, the ravine behind them littered with silence and ghosts. Ahead, the desert stretched wide and merciless. Every mile a gamble between life and death. The sun stood high when they reached the ruins of Dry Creek. The town was a skeleton, wind whipping through broken windows, the saloon's doors hanging loose. The sign faded to a ghost of paint. The railway line shimmered faintly in the distance, heat waves bending it like a mirage. Elias scanned the street. Used to be miners here. Now it's just the wind. Lila leaned on a post, weary, her dress torn and face smudged with dirt. We'll make it. He nodded, though his eyes said otherwise. We'll try. They found water in an old trough behind the saloon, warm and metallic, but drinkable. Lila cupped her hands and drank, then sat in the shade, watching him. He cleaned his rifle, movements quiet, methodical. When we get to the station, there'll be folks who can help you, he said. You don't owe me a word after that. She studied him. You poured out that whiskey. You could have walked away. Why didn't you? Elias hesitated. 'Cause I seen what happens when men stop caring who they sell. I wasn't about to watch it happen again. The words hung between them like dust motes in sunlight. She understood then that his scars ran deeper than gunfire. A faint rumble cut through the stillness. Horses again. For maybe 5 this time. Elias rose instantly. Get inside, he ordered. Lila obeyed, ducking into the saloon as the hoofbeats drew near. She crouched behind the counter, heart pounding. Through the crack in the shutters, she saw them, men in dusters, rifles slung low, faces hard. One of them wore a black hat. She remembered from the night of the trade. Her stomach turned. That's him, she whispered. The man who bought me. Elias's jaw tightened. Stay low. The riders dismounted, boots crunching in the dirt. The leader called out, voice thick with arrogance. Ain't no use hiding. Stranger. Girl belongs to us. Elias stepped into the open, rifle in hand. Ain't no one's property here. The man laughed, a harsh, cruel sound. You think you can play hero, cowboy? You'll die for nothing. Maybe, Elias said, but not today. The gunfight erupted in a blur. Shots cracked, wood splintered, glass shattered. Elias dropped to one knee, firing twice. 2 men fell before the rest could reload. Lila's fear turned to fire. She grabbed a fallen revolver from behind the counter and aimed at the man in the black hat. He turned just as she fired, the bullet grazing his arm, spinning him sideways. Elias seized a moment, stepped forward, and fired once. The black hat man hit the dirt, his pistol slipping from his hand. The others turned and fled, vanishing in a cloud of dust. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by Lila's ragged breathing. She stepped into the street, shaking. The man she feared most lay at her feet. Still, his whiskey bottle shattered beside him. Elias walked up beside her, his shadow long across the dust. It's done. She looked at him, her voice trembling. Then why do I still feel trapped? He holstered his gun, eyes distant. 'Cause freedom ain't just running away from something. It's learning to live after. The wind stirred between them, carrying the scent of iron and dust. Lila closed her eyes, breathing it in. When she opened them again, she saw the train tracks gleaming far off, thin silver threads of promise. Come with me, she said softly. You don't have to stay behind. Elias gave her a small, tired smile. You go on. World's got room for you now. Mine's still back here somewhere. She wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her. So she nodded once firm. By the time the sun dipped low, she was on that train, looking back through the window as the desert rolled away. The bottle he'd poured out seemed to echo in her memory, a single act of defiance that had rewritten her life. And as the whistle cried across the plains, she whispered to the fading horizon, You didn't just free me, Elias. You freed yourself, too. The frontier swallowed the sound. And somewhere in the empty stretch of land behind her, a lone rider turned his horse toward the hills, disappearing into the dying light.